we humbly present this special summary story on what is truly this century's monumental tragedy. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, only 46 years old, was suddenly, without warning and without mercy, cut off at the peak of his powers by the telescopic eye of intolerance. 2 swift bullets crushing the life in a man whose mission in this world was peace, tolerance, dignity, and brotherhood. He was riding through the streets of Dallas in the early afternoon, triumphant and vigorous, and moving ahead in the task of national and international endeavors. In a moment there was life, the dynamic energy of a man who sought justice wherever he found injustice, at home or in foreign shores. In a moment there was youth, the vigor of a new America, forging forward under his leadership, which he himself defined as committed to the ideals by which all men shall find liberty. But at the next moment, at the turn of another corner of a tragic street, the life, the youth, the energy, and the future of a great statesman and leader was extinguished. There was a song of laughter. Senate Majority Floor Leader Mike Mansfield said at the necrological rites at the Capitol yesterday, and all of a sudden it was no more. Jacqueline Kennedy, bending over the fallen body of her husband, could only cry out, "Oh no."
There was the sound of laughter, and in a moment it was no more. And so she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands. There was a wit in a man, neither young nor old, but a wit full of an old man's wisdom and a child's wisdom. And then, in a moment, it was no more. And so she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands. There was a man, marked with the scars of his love of country, a body active with the surge of a life, far from spent. And in a moment, it was no more. And so, she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands. There was a father with a little boy and a little girl, and the joy of each in the other hand. In a moment, it was no more. And so, she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands. There was a husband who asked much and gave much, and out of the giving and the asking, wove with a woman what could not be broken in life, and in a moment, it was no more. And so, she took a ring from her finger and placed it in his hands, and kissed him, and closed the lid of the coffin. A piece of each of us died at that moment. Yet in death, he gave of himself to us. He gave us of a good heart from which the laughter came. He gave us of a profound wit from which a great leadership emerged. He gave us of a kindness and a strength fused into the human courage to seek peace without fear. He gave us of his love that we too in turn might give. He gave that we might give of ourselves, that we might give to one another, until there would be no room at all for the bigotry, the hatred, the prejudice, and the arrogance which converged in that moment of horror to strike him down. In leaving us these gifts, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States, leaves with us. When we take them, Mr. President, will we have now the sense and the responsibility and the courage to take them? I pray to God that we shall, and under God we will.
The tragedy in Dallas, Texas, early Friday afternoon has been told and retold. But even as John Fitzgerald Kennedy has been laid to rest at the Arlington National Cemetery, there persists that wave of shock, horror, disbelief that first quickly spread across the American nation and rolled over the seas with the tide-like ferocity of its grave meaning and gruesome reality. Jacqueline's own farewell to her dying husband will long remain the personal anguish of all humanity. All America and the rest of the world grieved the monstrous murder of the American chief executive. The desolation that gripped men's hearts everywhere around the world found expression in the lips of their living leaders, in the voices of commentators of radio and television, and even in the uneven lines jotted down in the small notebook of an American journalist who walked down the streets of the nation's capital and found desolation in the emptiness of the session halls of the American Capitol on that fateful evening of November 22nd.
We looked onto the quiet and empty floor of the House of Representatives this afternoon, and we could read the story there in the uneven rows of brown chairs. We glanced into the Senate chamber, and we heard the silence there. We stood and watched a flag come down slowly to half-mast atop the old House office building, and there was something quietly final about that. We saw the many people standing near the White House gate, and we felt the sadness and the stillness among them. We listened to hushed voices of usually strident-toned reporters in the Capitol, and there was unreality in that. We were aware of a November haze over Washington, and there was time and distance reflected in it, and a somberness of atmosphere. Most of all, we felt the mood. It was heard in unspoken comments, seen in faces, realized in the tears of a young girl, evident in the handkerchief at the eyes of an old man. There are hundreds of thousands of thoughts, opinions, viewpoints, reasons in the minds of thinking people about what happened today. We cannot put it out of mind, nor condone it, nor explain it away. There is only an infinitesimal comfort in the fact that a man sleeps in quiet and final peace this night. Good night, Mr. President.
This was America grieving. This was the world grieving. And from the lips of the living leaders in world affairs poured the rhetorical condolences and tributary messages. The eloquent Sir Winston Churchill of Britain said, "The world had lost a great statesman and a wise and valiant man." President Charles de Gaulle of France saluted the late American chief executive as a great soldier who died under fire. Other European leaders joined the chorus of condolences. British Prime Minister Sir Alec Douglas Hume, West German Chancellor Ludwig Erhard, West Berlin Mayor Willy Brandt, and the messages from Europe have been pouring into Washington since then. Leaders in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and even the Soviet Union sent their messages. Our president, Diosdado Macapagal, called Mr. Kennedy's death a blow to democracy, struck by the hand of intolerance. Cables of condolences also came from Japan, South Korea, South Vietnam, Malaysia, with the single exception of Communist China, which ignored the American president's demise. Former American presidents, led by former President Dwight Eisenhower, voiced their grief. Mr. Eisenhower said,
"I share the sense of shock and dismay that the entire nation must feel at the despicable act that took the life of the nation's president. On the personal side, Mrs. Eisenhower and I share the grief that Mrs. Kennedy must now feel. And we send to her our prayerful thoughts and sympathetic sentiments in this hour."
General, how would you counsel the American people at this time?
In the face of such a terrible thing, I'm sure the entire citizenry of the nation will join as one man in expressing not only their grief but their indignation at this act, and will stand faithfully behind the government.
But the worldwide reaction was solidly expressed by the United Nations, whose 111 members received the news of the tragedy from General Assembly President Sosa Rodriguez of Venezuela, and who heard Secretary General U Thant express their common grief.
"I have to perform the sad duty of announcing to the General Assembly the tragic death of President Kennedy, assassinated this afternoon in Dallas, Texas. I know I shall be interpreting the general feelings of the Assembly when I convey to Ambassador Stevenson our deepest sympathy, and I ask him to transmit our condolences to Mrs. Kennedy, to Vice President Lyndon Johnson, and to the other members of the family of the late president. I call now on the Secretary General."
Mr. President, as Secretary General of the United Nations, I would like to express profound sorrow at this most tragic event, and to be associated in the condolences to Mrs. Kennedy, to the members of the bereaved family, and to the government and people of the United States.
The flag of the United Nations stays at half-mast, along with the flags of the 111 member nations. This is the international symbol of the sorrow shared by all the peoples of the world in the death of the late President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. But why such tribute to a man? The answer is simple. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy cared a lot for humanity. Even as he has become the center of the grieving attention of the world, man must not forget the way he viewed the world, the way he looked at the singleness of the purpose of humanity itself. In one word, it was with love that he viewed his fellow men. In more words, it was for the survival of man, the survival of his individual and basic rights to freedom, justice, dignity, and prosperity. In several phrases, It was his faith in the peoples that walk the earth, in the journeys individuals and nations travel to reach a common destiny. Again, in one word, it was brotherhood. For John F. Kennedy, born May 29, 1917 in Brookline, Massachusetts, and died on November 22, 1963, sought to save mankind itself. Stepping into the awesome office of President of the United States at the age of 44, Mr. Kennedy defined his purposes in cadences of sincerity. He came at a time when the world itself swayed in the balance of the terror that man himself had created. And so, in brief, he said he would seek peace with dignity, with firmness, and with sincerity.
So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
The search for peace is long and hazardous, made more dangerous than ever before because of the engines of war, which, through man's own creation, have grown into diabolical monsters of impending doom. President Kennedy, like all men, lived under this terror, but unlike most men, courageously declined to be daunted. Let us begin anew, he said, and he put into motion the forces of his administration and his leadership into finding a beginning, at least of that elusive peace. Again and again he appealed for general and complete disarmament with effective international safeguards before the United Nations.
Today, every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be habitable. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us. The risks inherent in disarmament pale in comparison to the risks inherent in an unlimited arms race. It is in this spirit that the recent Belgrade conference, recognizing that this is no longer a Soviet problem or an American problem, but a human problem, endorsed a program of general, complete, and strictly and internationally controlled disarmament. It is therefore our intention to challenge the Soviet Union not to an arms race, but to a peace race, to advance together, step by step, stage by stage, until general and complete disarmament has been achieved. We invite them now to go beyond agreement in principle, to reach agreement on actual plans. The logical place to begin is a treaty assuring the end of nuclear tests
of all kinds in every environment under workable controls. The United States and the United Kingdom have proposed such a treaty that is both reasonable, effective, and ready for signature. We are still prepared to sign that treaty today.
His invitation to the Soviet Union to a race for peace finally reached limited success with the signing this year of the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And even as this relaxed East-West tensions, he warned against false hopes, for he believed too that vigilance is the price of liberty.
Today we may have reached a pause in the Cold War, but that is not a lasting peace. A test ban treaty is a milestone, but it is not the millennium. We have not been released from our obligations. We have been given an opportunity. And if we fail to make the most of this moment and this momentum, if we convert our newfound hopes and understandings into new walls and weapons of hostility, if this pause in the Cold War merely leads to its renewal and not its end, then the indictment of posterity will rightly point its finger at us all.
World peace and freedom were indivisible in the view of the late President John Kennedy, so that when Russia, in an effort to upset the balance of power, tried to transform America's backdoor neighbor, Cuba, into the missile arsenal, President Kennedy firmly drew the line beyond which even nuclear war could result. Thus, in the decisive fall of last year, the American chief executive made it known to the whole world that America was willing to pay the price to preserve liberty.
Our policy has been one of patience and restraint, as befits a peaceful and powerful nation which leads a worldwide alliance. We have been determined not to be diverted from our central concerns by mere irritants and fanatics. But now further action is required, and it is underway, and these actions may only be the beginning. We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the course of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk. At any time it must be faced.
The issues that divide East and West are many and very difficult at that to resolve. But while bargaining for peace, Mr. Kennedy clearly told America's adversary in the Cold War that it would uphold its rights and its commitments. The city of Berlin, the last outpost of freedom in East Germany, was almost a terrifying issue. It was, and still is, the tinderbox of the Cold War, the testing ground of East and West, grappling together in a massive show of determination and strength. Mr. Kennedy defined the position of the West and stuck to it.
I wish to report to you on the crisis over Germany and Berlin. If there is a crisis, it is because an existing peace in that area is under threat, because an existing island of free people is under pressure, because solemn agreements are being treated with indifference. The elementary fact about this crisis is that it is unnecessary. If there is a desire for change, it must be a subject for negotiation. And if there is negotiation, it must be rooted in mutual respect and concern for the rights of others.
Berlin and Cuba are not the only trouble spots in the Cold War. There were Laos and the Congo. There were troubles in Western European unity. There was South America, infiltrated by the communists. There were domestic troubles. The Negroes were agitating for equality. There was the national economy, threatened by strikes and black days at the stock market. Mr. Kennedy tried to solve these international and national problems with the aggressiveness of his programs, with the zeal of his youth, and with the firmness of his character. There was so much to be done, and he could have done much more. But early afternoon of November 22nd came, and an assassin, waiting by a high window, wiped the grease of a half-eaten fried chicken from his hands, looked through the telescopic sights of his high-powered German-made rifle, and pulled the trigger. 3 bullets spat out. 2 found their mark on the American president. A half-hour later, the president was dead, leaving unfinished business behind, the business of world peace. Yesterday, they brought his body to the Capitol. The world watched and listened with grief.
The honor guard marches 100 steps to the minute, in cadence to the muffled drums. The caisson's wooden wheels are shod with steel, and they rumble sadly with heavy tones to match the drum tattoo. The caisson rolls on Pennsylvania Avenue, where the people in their many thousands have come to say goodbye. On both sides, soldiers stand like statues. Behind them, the people, masked deeply. There is disbelief in the faces and a loss of individuality. The set of mouths, the stare of eyes, are so alike in sorrow. The caisson rolls. Heads bow in silent prayer. His hands are folded. There is heavy breathing, an almost perceptible moan. The caisson rolls. The drums beat. The leafless trees are lonely sentinels in a plaintive parade. Up the hill to the Capitol, and the final beat of drums. The president is born inside under the dome of the Capitol, in the building that had seen his growth as a young congressman, then a senator, and on to president. Here his voice echoed with determination, outlining his dream of a new world, of peace and trust and fellowship, when hate would be a word lost in antiquity. In the large circular hall, a catafalque is waiting to receive him. The same cradle where Abraham Lincoln rested almost 100 years ago. Now words are spoken, and the assembled are reminded that John Kennedy is dead. But so is a piece of each of us. Yet, as we have lost, we have gained. For he gave us of himself, too. He gave us leadership and compassion and strength when it was needed. There was love, too, offered unselfishly so that we might love in turn. These things were said. The guard of honor steps back a pace, and a figure approaches the bier. Mrs. Kennedy walks to the coffin, kneels at its foot in prayer. Now she stands, then leans forward, places a final kiss on the flag that envelops her husband. Tomorrow he goes to his final resting place.
And tomorrow is today. A sorrowing nation and a sorrowing world said farewell to America's martyred 35th president. The final journey was slow, silent, quiet, except for the muffled roll of the mournful drums. Statesmen from around the globe joined the funeral march that wound itself down Pennsylvania Avenue towards the White House, then to St. Matthew's Cathedral, where a requiem mass was said by Richard Cardinal Cushing. From the cathedral on to Arlington National Cemetery, the resting place of America's heroes. The taps heightened and climaxed the world's grief. And finally, slipping away from the young widow and the young children he had left behind, slipping away from the embrace of those he loved on earth, away from the nation and the world he served so well, John F. Kennedy was lowered into the bosom of this planet he sought to save.
The decision is ours. Never have the nations of the world had so much to lose or so much to gain. Together we shall save our planet, or together we shall perish in its flames. Save it we can, and save it we must. And then shall we earn the eternal thanks of mankind, and as peacemakers, the eternal blessing of God.
As the last sound of the bugle fades in the distance, there rises again on this earth the tribute it had just paid him for his greatness, for his life, and for his humanity. The reminder of man's eternal joys and sorrows, spoken eloquently by Most Reverend Philip Hannan, Auxiliary Bishop of the Washington Archdiocese, who delivered the eulogy at St. Matthew's Cathedral, is heard in every man's memory.
It was thought that the most appropriate commemoration of this heartbreaking event would be the expression of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy's ideals and sources of inspiration in his own words. President John Kennedy was fond of quoting the Holy Bible. In the last dinner of his life in Houston, Texas, last Thursday night, he applied to a friend, as it should be applied to him, this combination of passages from the Proverbs and the prophecy of Joel. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see vision. And where there is no vision, the people perish. And to those who shared his vision in this land and abroad, he had said 2 months ago to the United Nations, let us complete what we have started. For as the scriptures tell us, no man who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. At this time of sorrow and burden, he would have us remember the passages from Joshua and Isaiah he had used in accepting the presidential nomination. Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. Finally, in his last hours, President Kennedy had prepared these words for Dallas and for the nation. The righteousness of our cause must always underlie our strength. For as was written long ago, except the Lord guard the city, the guard watches in vain. The following is one of his favorite passages from Scripture, from the book of Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter. There is an appointed time for everything, and a time for every affair under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot the plant. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, and a time to be far from embraces. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to rend, and a time to sow. A time to be silent, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time of war, and a time of peace. And now is the final expression of his ideals and his aspirations, his inaugural address. We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friends and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans, born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. Let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet.
The words are immortal, so now is the man.
So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Let both sides explore what problems unite us, instead of belaboring those problems which divide us. Let both sides, for the first time, formulate serious and precise proposals for the inspection and control of arms, and bring the absolute power to destroy other nations under the absolute control of all nations. Let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depths, and encourage the arts and commerce. Let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free. And if a beachhead of cooperation may push back the jungle of suspicion, let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin.